Flatten every inch of it. That ugly pile is coming down today.
That's what the HOA president screamed over the fence as an excavator chewed through the one thing keeping her entire neighborhood from flooding. I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching a fully permitted stormwater berm get shredded into caliche dust on my own property. She called it visual pollution. She didn't know it was the only thing stopping 14 acre-feet of runoff from hitting her cul-de-sac during every major storm. The kind of woman who confuses control with competence had just ordered the destruction of her own protection. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't even put down my coffee. I pulled out my phone, opened the NOAA app, and watched the first rain bands of Hurricane Celeste spiral toward the coast. What would you do if your HOA forced you to destroy the one thing keeping them dry? Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? I'm Wade Calloway, 59 years old. 31 of them spent moving water for the United States Army Corps of Engineers. I ran project management out of Fort Worth District, Lake of the Pines in East Texas, levee rebuilds down in Louisiana after Katrina, drainage master plans for half the river basins in my home state. Water does exactly what physics tells it to do. People, on the other hand, sometimes need a little more persuasion. My wife Abby died 4 years before this story starts. Breast cancer. 41 weeks from the first scan to the last breath. Before she went, she made me promise 2 things. Finish her garden, and build the house in Wimberley we'd been dreaming about since our honeymoon. I couldn't save her, but I could keep a promise. So in the spring of 2022, I bought 5 acres of hill country limestone off Old Mill Road, 40 minutes from where our daughter Emma teaches kinesiology at Texas State. I watched 2 summers pass with a camping chair and a travel trailer before the foundation was even poured. The cedars smelled like warm pencil shavings after every rain. The oak motte out back whispered when the Gulf wind came up the valley. And on the kitchen table every morning sat a linen napkin Abby had embroidered in 1994, with one word in neat blue thread: home. The berm was already there when I bought the place. The previous owner, a retired rancher, had thrown up a rough earthen diversion back in 2005 to keep the creek from chewing through his driveway. I re-engineered it. 3 berms, 2 grassed swales, 400 feet of French drain. Every foot permitted, every calculation stamped with my own professional engineer seal. During a major storm, that system quietly redirected about 14 acre-feet of water around the valley floor and into the natural creek channel. The cul-de-sac below me, the brand new Cypress Bluff Estates, built in 2019 on what used to be pasture land, stayed dry every season because of it. They didn't know. I didn't advertise. That's how real engineering works. When it does its job, nobody notices. Brooke Hennessy noticed the mound of dirt. 3 weeks after I moved in, a white Tahoe pulled halfway across my driveway. The door slammed. Out stepped a woman in a linen blazer over yoga pants, sunglasses too expensive for her to be wearing during a cedar pollen storm, and a smile thin as a grocery store coupon. She carried a clipboard. In the South, that's not jewelry, that's a weapon. Mr. Calloway, I'm Brooke Hennessy. I'm the voice of this community. I set down my coffee. Not my Abby mug, the cheap one. She handed me a 47-page welcome packet and asked, without asking, if she could come inside and go over the covenants. I told her, kindly, that my parcel wasn't part of Cypress Bluff Estates, never had been, and showed her a county record dating to 1971. She smiled like someone tolerating a child's wrong answer. Everyone here agrees otherwise, dear. 2 weeks later, I found the first violation letter tucked under my wiper blade. Aesthetic non-compliance, unauthorized earthen structures, fine, $250 a day if the berm wasn't flattened within 30 days. My neighbor Maggie Thornton, the kind of woman who shows up with cornbread the first week, came down the gravel road that afternoon and leaned on my tailgate. She didn't even look up when she said it. She ran off 2 families before you, Wade. Both left crying. Watch yourself. That night, I pulled out the box of old county plats I'd inherited from closing. Something about the 2019 amendment didn't line up with my 1971 record. It was a small crooked line in the middle of a map. And small crooked lines, I've learned over 31 years of moving water, are almost always the place you start digging. The Tuesday after that letter, Brooke knocked on my door with a shorter man trailing behind her, like a Labrador who'd been promoted to manager. She introduced him as Bryce Holloway, vice president of the Cypress Bluff HOA. They wanted access to my property to inspect the structure. I offered them coffee. I did not offer them access. I told Brooke that, in Texas, only a licensed inspector with proper authority could enter private land for code enforcement. She tilted her head. Reed can make this very unpleasant for you, Mr. Calloway. He sits on the planning commission. I nodded, polite as a Sunday, and closed the door. Then I wrote one word in my notebook next to her name. Reed. Planning Commission. I underlined it twice. In 31 years of federal work, I'd learned that a threat using someone else's name tells you who actually runs the operation. On day 12, I sent a certified letter to the HOA board. Inside were my stamped engineering drawings, the county permit numbers, a copy of my PE license, and a short service record from the United States Army Corps of Engineers, verifying 31 years of stormwater work. The envelope came back unopened the following Monday. Brooke Hennessy had refused to sign. The second violation notice arrived 3 days later. The parcel identifier on the letter was wrong. It listed my land by the HOA's 2019 lot number instead of the Hays County APN that had been on the deed since 1971. Not a small mistake. Not even a clerical one. In a boundary dispute, the parcel identifier is the whole ballgame. I drove to the Hays County Courthouse on a Thursday morning. The clerk was a young woman named Shelby, with a dark braid down her back, and a coffee mug that said, "Meant to be retired by now." She pulled the parcel history while I waited. The printer rolled out 73 pages of grant deeds, lien releases, survey amendments, and tax rolls. Ownership ran one clean line. Calloway to Calloway to Calloway. 1971 to present. My land had never, not once, been inside Cypress Bluff Estates. Do you want copies, Mr. Calloway? 3, please. And can you notarize the certification page? Shelby smiled. You're not the first one to ask me that this year. I walked out into the sunshine with a cardboard box under my arm. A roadrunner darted across the parking lot. The smell of hot asphalt mixed with the faint sweetness of mountain laurel from the courthouse lawn. For the first time in 6 weeks, I felt the weight of the paperwork shift from defensive to strategic. That evening, Emma called. She'd seen a Facebook post in the Cypress Bluff group from Brooke, rallying neighbors to express their concern at 1847 Old Mill Road. 2 pickup trucks had already driven by the house that afternoon. One phone held out the window. A passenger in a silver Outback mouthed, "Sorry," as they passed. "Dad, please come stay with me for a week. Let them calm down. Sweetheart, if I leave, they'll claim abandonment. If I stay, they'll photograph me mowing the yard. I'm safer with a coffee pot and a paper trail." The line went quiet. Then Emma, in her mother's exact voice. "Your jaw is doing the thing, isn't it?" "It is." The next morning I drove into town to meet Harlan Buckley. Harlan was a former county prosecutor who'd walked away from 32 years of felony trials to hang out his own shingle above a feed store on South Main. He wore boots older than my daughter and sipped coffee so black you could float a nickel on it. He flipped through the open records I'd already assembled. He tapped the violation letter with one calloused finger. "Wade, they picked the wrong engineer to bully. What do you want me to do, Harlan?" "Nothing loud, not yet. Don't answer them. Let them escalate. Every letter they write, every meeting they hold, every petition they circulate. It's all evidence they're building for us. Don't stop the dig. Let them tunnel." I pulled out a second folder. A single form, Texas Government Code Chapter 552, Open Records Request. Harlan read it and grinned. Plat Amendment 2019. Every drainage document signed by Reed Hennessy. Every board minute since they seated him. Smart, Wade. File it today. I walked out into the afternoon sun, with a cicada singing somewhere in the rooftop air conditioner. On the truck bench next to me sat 3 certified copies of a 60-year paper trail. I pulled Noah up on my phone. A tropical wave had formed that morning off the coast of Africa. The storm season was just warming up, and I had time. For now. Day 25. A cream-colored envelope landed in my mailbox with the Hays County Development Services seal stamped in green. Notice of violation. Compliance deadline, 14 days. Projected lien amount, if unresolved, $45,000. I read it twice, then read the signature line 3 times. It wasn't signed by the director. It was signed by a deputy director whose office reports directly to the Planning Commission chair. Reed Hennessy's office. The fingerprints weren't subtle. Harlan Buckley laughed when he read the notice. Not the polite lawyer laugh. The other one. He set the letter on top of a coffee-ringed copy of the Texas Local Government Code and tapped his finger on Chapter 176. Wade, this isn't enforcement. This is a favor for a husband. He walked me through it. Under Section 176 of the Texas Local Government Code, any county officer whose household stands to benefit financially from an official action, say, a planning commissioner whose wife is president of an HOA, whose dues depend on property values, must file a written conflict of interest disclosure. Reed had never filed one, not for Cypress Bluff, not for any of the 17 drainage approvals he'd quietly stamped on that subdivision since 2019. If his signature appears anywhere in your enforcement file, Wade, every action he touched becomes voidable. Every single one. I sat with that for a minute. The fluorescent bulb above Harlan's desk flickered like it was applauding. Somewhere in the hallway, a fax machine wheezed out a page that still smelled faintly of heat. That night, Emma video called from her apartment in San Marcos. She was stirring chili con carne and wearing my old core sweatshirt, the one with the faded Fort Worth district patch on the shoulder. She'd been watching me closely, pretending not to. Dad, why don't you just sell it and move closer to me? I picked up Abby's linen napkin from the table. This wasn't just my dream, sweetheart. It was your mother's, too. She stood on that ridge with me in 1998 and picked the spot. Emma didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, okay, but use me. I'll carry boxes. I'll file papers. Whatever you need. She looked exactly like her mother when she got quiet like that. I had to look away from the screen for a second. On day 32, Brooke Hennessy held a community meeting in the clubhouse. She did not send me an invitation. Maggie Thornton sent me a cell phone video afterward. 67 seconds. Grainy. Enough. In the recording, Brooke stood at the front of the room with a ring light on a tripod, a ring light at a homeowners meeting, and announced that Mr. Calloway is an outsider who thinks his engineering degree puts him above our community standards. A woman in the front row clapped. A man near the coffee table laughed. Then Brooke leaned into the mic and added, "He's been letting his property become a health hazard for this entire valley." I played the clip 3 times. Then I picked up a red pen and circled 4 phrases. One was the outsider line. One was the health hazard line. The other 2 were softer, but in Texas, a published statement that falsely attributes a dangerous public condition to a named individual is actionable. I dated the margin. I filed it under Volume 2. The next morning, I mailed a certified objection to the county, citing Chapter 176, citing Government Code 552, citing every single county record going back to 1971. I CC'd the Texas Attorney General's office and the Texas Board of Professional Engineers. I did not wait for a response. I wanted Reed to see the envelope. I wanted him to know what was coming before the paperwork arrived. My phone rang that evening. The number was unfamiliar. I answered with my full name. "Mr. Calloway, it's Brooke Hennessy. This can get much worse for you. Reed doesn't lose. You have no idea what my husband can do." I let her sentence breathe. Then I answered gentle as a check-in at the feed store. "Good, ma'am. I prefer opponents who don't know when to stop." I hung up. Then I stood on the porch and watched the evening turn lavender over the cedar line. A Gulf breeze came up the valley, carrying the smell of distant rain. My phone chirped. NOAA. Tropical Depression 15 had been upgraded to a named storm. Celeste. 7. I finished my coffee and went inside to keep building the record. Day 41 brought the lawsuit threat. A thick envelope from Wexler & Doyle, an Austin firm that charges hourly rates the way oil rigs charge production royalties. 11 pages, single-spaced, full of words like willful, aggrieved, and equitable remedy. They demanded removal of the berm within 7 days, or a $125,000 civil action. Harlan read it at his kitchen table with his reading glasses halfway down his nose. He finished page 4, snorted, and flipped back to page 1. "Wade, whoever drafted this would fail a first-year law school exam. They don't want a lawsuit. They want you to panic. So what do we do?" He put the letter down and looked at me over his glasses. "You comply. Publicly, loudly, with a camera rolling and a lawyer on speed dial." It took me a minute to track his logic. Harlan explained, patient as a Sunday school teacher, that every day I resisted was another day of fines they could point to. Every day I fought their authority head-on, they dragged me deeper into the fiction that they had any. But if I complied, under written protest, with warning, on record, then the hydrologic consequence of that compliance belonged to them. And Wade, Once they own the consequence, the storm does what the storm does. I drove home that radio off. I watched the valley from the porch a long time. The cedars smelled dry. The whippoorwill that nested near the live oak had already started its evening call. I thought about June Whitaker, the widow 2 doors from Brooke, who always waved when I picked up the paper. I thought about the Ridgeways with their baby girl. I thought about 100 families I didn't yet know who lived below the berm. I couldn't warn them personally. They'd already been warned through their HOA. I had to trust that one day they'd understand. That night I drafted a letter, 4 pages, addressed individually to each member of the Cypress Bluff Estates HOA Board of Directors. The body was plain and factual. The earthen structure you are demanding I remove is a permitted hydrologic diversion. Removal will redirect up to 14 acre-feet of stormwater per major rain event into the low-point homes of your subdivision. I am complying under duress. I request the board acknowledge in writing that the hydrologic consequences of this removal are yours. I mailed 5 certified copies the next morning. Within 6 days, all 5 came back. Returned to sender. Refused. Brooke Hennessy had ordered the board not to accept them. That was the moment I knew we'd won. A letter refused is still a letter delivered. In Texas, the restatement principles apply. Notice of danger given and actively declined transfers the legal weight of foreseeability straight on to the party who refused to read. Day 50. I hired Kendrick's Excavation, a father-son outfit out of Driftwood. I told Dwayne Kendrick the whole story over the hood of his Kenworth. He listened, whistled once, and said, "Mr. Calloway, my daddy did drainage work for the Corps back in the 80s. We'll do this job right, and we'll do it with cameras." The GoPros went on the hard hats. The Rio Links went on my fence line. The Browning trail cams covered the perimeter, every angle recorded in 4K. Brooke drove over on day 51. She parked on the shoulder of Old Mill Road with a thermos, a camp chair, and, I swear to God, a striped beach umbrella. She clapped when the first scoop of caliche came out of the ground. The machine smelled like diesel and hot metal. The dust blew up thick. It stuck to my tongue. The sun hit 103 degrees by noon. The cicadas went so loud the crew had to shout to each other. Dwayne's son Josh ran the excavator with the calm of a man who'd done it 10,000 times before. Every scoop made Brooke giddier. She filmed me from across the fence and waved like we were on vacation. Near the end of day 2, she cupped her hands to her mouth and yelled across the property line, "Mr. Calloway, maybe now you'll understand who runs this valley." I didn't turn. I knew the microphones were hot. I knew her face was in 4 cameras. Emma called me that night. She sounded small. "Dad, are you sure this is the right thing?" I looked out the window at the flat stretch of dirt where my engineering used to live. The wind had shifted south. The sky had begun to bruise around the edges. "Honey," I said, "the right thing is already done. Now we wait for the sky." A week later, NOAA pushed Tropical Storm Celeste to Category 2. Projected landfall, Corpus Christi. Expected inland rainfall over Hays County, 7 to 11 inches in 120 minutes. I closed the app. I opened the cedar chest where Abby's napkin lived, laid the letter of warning on top of it, and closed the lid. She'd have understood. I was ready. Day 54. The courier truck from the Hays County Clerk's office pulled into my gravel drive at 9:15 in the morning. 1 cardboard box, 340 pages. Open records response. I set the box on the kitchen table next to Abby's napkin and made a fresh pot of coffee. You don't rush into paperwork that might end a woman's life as she knows it. You brew a full pot and you go 1 page at a time. The first discovery came on page 87. Plat Amendment 2019-037, Cypress Bluff Estates. Signed by developer Arlen Thatcher. Approved by Planning Commissioner Reed Hennessy on June 14, 2019. The attached plat map drew a neat black line that gobbled up my 5 acres into a new lot, 43. But in the small print at the bottom margin, the assessor's parcel number tagged to that lot was the same APN number Shelby had pulled from her 1971 records. They'd moved the line on the map. They hadn't moved the deed. They couldn't, because my family owned the deed. In plain English, somebody had drawn over my property without telling me, and asked the county to pretend I'd agreed. The second discovery was on page 118. Drainage Calculation Report 2019, prepared by Lance Covington, P.E., and stamped with his Texas license. The report relied, explicitly in a table on page 6, on the existing earthen diversion on parcel R-1 4823-A as the primary runoff control mechanism for the entire subdivision downslope. Parcel R-1 4823-A was my land, my berm, my private property. They had designed a neighborhood's drainage around a private structure they had neither rights to nor agreements with, and Reed Hennessy had stamped it approved. And the third discovery, the one that made me set my coffee down and walk outside, was that nowhere in the 340 pages was there a single Section 176 conflict of interest disclosure from Reed Hennessy. Not one. Not for the plat amendment, not for the drainage report, not for the 17 subsequent drainage approvals he'd signed for a subdivision his wife presided over. Every action was voidable. Every home in Cypress Bluff Estates might be sitting on a certificate of occupancy that had been issued on fraudulent calculations. I drove to Harlan's office that afternoon without calling ahead. Harlan took one look at my face, cleared his conference table, and locked the door behind us. We laid out the pages in order. He read for 22 silent minutes with his glasses on, then 22 silent minutes with his glasses off. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, laced his fingers behind his head, and blew out a long, slow breath. Wade, this isn't a boundary dispute. This is institutional fraud. This is the State Engineering Board. This is the Attorney General. This might be criminal. I nodded. What do we do, Harlan? He smiled. It was a quiet, dangerous smile I hadn't seen on his face before. Nothing loud. We filed a complaint to the Engineering Board. We filed a conflict of interest complaint to the County Ethics Commissioner. And then, Wade, we let the sky do what the sky is going to do. He paused. They picked the wrong neighbor to underestimate. No, I said. They picked the wrong witness. On the drive home, the sun was already turning copper behind the Cedar Ridge. The Gulf wind tasted heavier than it had the day before. I pulled into my driveway, shut off the truck, and stood for a minute in the quiet. Somewhere above the oak motte, an accipiter called once. Sharp, clean, unsentimental. 17 days until the first rain bands. The paper was in place. The case was built. And for the first time in 89 days, I wasn't the one being squeezed. The next 17 days ran on one principle. Build the record. Do not announce the record. Day 56. I drove to the Hayes County floodplain office. The elevator smelled like paper dust and burnt coffee. Priscilla Harmon met me behind the counter. Floodplain manager. 15 years on the job. Purple reading glasses low on her nose. Her office walls were layered with USGS topo maps and a framed clipping from the 2015 Memorial Day floods in Wimberley. I slid a single folder across her desk. No speech, just the folder. She read for 20 minutes in complete silence. When she looked up, her face had changed. Mr. Calloway, I've been waiting 8 years for somebody to bring me this file. She told me things I hadn't known. The original certificate of occupancy for Cypress Bluff had been signed by a development services director who was quietly forced out 6 months later over a different permit scandal. Priscilla had flagged the drainage math back in 2019 and been told to stand down. She'd kept her notes in a drawer in her desk for 5.5 years. Cycle Review Board meets in 90 days, she said. I can't pull the CO before then unless there's an emergency. But if an emergency happens, the record's already written, I said. She tapped the folder. Good. I'll keep this copy. Day 59. I filed the formal complaint with the Texas Board of Professional Engineers. 340 pages of exhibits, certified mail receipts, a chain of custody log, my own PE license number on the cover letter so they could verify in one phone call. 48 hours later, Declan Forsyth from the TBPE called me. Gray suit voice, low and careful. He'd read the complaint twice. He was opening a formal investigation into Lance Covington's report and Reed Hennessy's approval signature. He asked me, please, not to discuss the matter with anyone in the HOA. Mr. Calloway, let the process work. Build no more confrontation. Just keep the records coming. Yes, sir. I hung up and went back to my garage. The cameras came next. 8 Browning trail cams on solar mounts around the footprint of the old berm. 2 Rio-Link cameras on my fence line, aimed downslope toward the Cypress Bluff cul-de-sac. 1 hobo water-level logger buried in the swale floor, set to log every centimeter to the minute. Battery backup, cloud backup. If the storm knocked out power in the router, the record would still save 3 different ways. Emma drove up that Saturday with Fall Creek Cabernet and a block of sharp cheddar from the farmer's market. We organized the filing cabinet together in the second bedroom. Tabs, color codes, index cards, chronology. A system Abby would have loved. Somewhere in the third drawer, under an old envelope, Emma found my original pencil sketch for the berm from 2005. On the back, in her mother's tight cursive, were 2 lines. "Build it strong, sweetheart. Protect the valley." Emma's hand covered her mouth. She handed me the paper without speaking. I held it for a long time. The whippoorwill outside started its evening call. The cheddar on the cutting board smelled sharp and honest. I folded the sketch, slipped it into my shirt pocket, and carried it with me for the rest of the week. Day 67. Maggie Thornton knocked on my screen door with a USB drive in her hand. 45 minutes of audio. The most recent HOA meeting. Brooke lecturing the homeowners on community values and referring to me by name as the un-American element polluting our aesthetic harmony. I added the file to the chronology folder. I did not respond. I did not post it anywhere. Day 69. I met Tillman Rourke of KXAN Austin at Salt Lick BBQ. Harlan had introduced us. Tillman was a reporter the way my father had been a welder. Steady, unflashy, always watching the joint. Over brisket and sweet tea, I told him the whole story. No embellishment. He asked 2 questions. One was about the Section 176 statute. The other was about my daughter. At the end of the meal, he wiped his hands on a paper napkin and said, "Mr. Calloway, when this breaks, you call me first. I'll be on site in 40 minutes. I shook his hand. I did not ask for his card. I already had it. Day 72. I checked NOAA at 4 in the morning. Celeste had jumped to a Category 2 hurricane overnight. Landfall in 18 hours at Corpus Christi. Hays County was squarely inside the northern rain band. Modeled rainfall, 9 inches in 110 minutes. I picked up the phone. "Harlan, it's tomorrow. I'll be there." "Priscilla, it's time. I'm already briefing the commissioner's court." I stood in my garage and looked at everything I'd built over the last 17 days. Cameras, loggers, folders, index cards, backups. I had not built a trap. I had built a witness. And in about 22 hours, that witness was going to speak. Day 73. The HOA held a scenic view victory party in the Cypress Bluff clubhouse. A banner stretched across the entrance. "Cypress Bluff, our standards win." I was not invited. Maggie Thornton was. She wore her listening face and carried a phone with fresh batteries. In the recording she sent me that night, I could hear 60 or 70 voices milling, ice clinking in plastic wine glasses, a Jimmy Buffett playlist over the sound system, the popping laugh Brooke made when she drank too fast on an empty stomach. Brooke took the microphone at 8:40. Yellow linen dress, champagne flute, the room hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time in 3 years, the view from my kitchen is unobstructed." Applause. We didn't just win a fight, we restored the natural beauty of this valley. We held the line on community standards. We did what this board was elected to do. More applause. Then the part I rewound 3 times. And I want to give a special thanks to my husband, Reed, who handled the paperwork personally through the Planning Commission. Some of you know Reed doesn't like the spotlight, but he took care of this one for us, for all of us. Whistles. A man yelled, "Atta girl, Brooke." Somebody popped another bottle. I listened to those 18 seconds alone at my kitchen table, with the lights off and the refrigerator humming. Emma was visiting that weekend. She stood in the doorway in her socks. "Dad, she just admitted the whole thing." "Yes, honey." "On tape." "Yes." Is this the moment?" I looked at the cedar chest in the corner of the room, Abby's napkin, the pencil sketch, the certified letter sealed inside. No, this is the moment before. Day 75. Hurricane Celeste made landfall at Corpus Christi with a 100-mile-per-hour sustained wind. The rain bands peeled north. Brooke Hennessy posted a selfie beside the HOA swimming pool. The caption read, "Calm before the calm," with a wine glass emoji. I screenshotted it. Day 76. The first rain band crossed Hays County at 4:17 in the morning. Moderate intensity, half an inch an hour. Enough to test the cameras. Enough to make the cedar tang sharp and green in the dark. I stood on the porch in my slicker and watched the first runoff trace a new path. My path was gone, across the exposed caliche. By 4 in the afternoon, the second band arrived. 3 inches an hour. The kind of rain that drums a metal roof until the drumming becomes silence in the ears. Emma was already at my place. She'd driven up from San Marcos the night before. I called her into the kitchen. Honey, don't leave. Valley's about to flood. You stay with me. She nodded. No argument. She had her mother's sense of when to argue and when to keep her hands free. By 9 o'clock, the third band stalled directly over us. Stationary front, 5 inches in 40 minutes. The sky cracked sideways with lightning. The wind came off the ridge like somebody opening a freezer door. The whippoorwill had gone silent hours before. I don't know where it went. I hoped it was high. At 9:20, I pulled up the camera feed on my tablet. The runoff was already crossing the footprint of the old berm, curling south-southeast along the natural gradient, and pooling in the apex of the Cypress Bluff cul-de-sac. At 9:45, camera 1 caught the first car floating, a gray Mazda hatchback. It lifted off the driveway of 1203 Cypress Bluff Lane and drifted sideways into the street. June Whitaker's house. I didn't wait. I called 911 from the kitchen. Dispatch, this is Wade Calloway at 1847 Old Mill Road. I'm reporting active flooding on the Cypress Bluff Estates cul-de-sac. Ms. June Whitaker is a 72-year-old widow living alone at 1203 Cypress Bluff Lane. Her vehicle has already floated. She will need welfare check immediately. I pulled my Carhartt slicker off the hook, grabbed the spare flashlight, grabbed the life vest from the garage. Emma followed me to the driveway. Dad, I'm getting June. Stay at the house. Warm water ready. Blankets out of the hall closet. Emma's face said a dozen things. She picked one. Be careful. Always am, honey. I put the F250 in four-wheel drive and took the old easement road the county had abandoned in '94. The one the HOA gate didn't know about. The rain hit the windshield like gravel out of a truck bed. The wipers couldn't keep pace. I kept both hands on the wheel and the low-range transfer case set to a walking crawl. I reached June Whitaker's driveway at 3 minutes past 10. The water was already knee-high. Her porch light flickered twice and died. I left the truck idling in high ground, grabbed the flashlight, and waited across the lawn. I pounded on the door. No answer. I pounded again. Still nothing. I shouted her name over the storm. On the third try, I heard a small voice, higher than I expected, calling back from inside. I'm here. I can't get to the door. I set my shoulder against it and pushed through. The frame gave on the second shove. Inside, the house smelled like bath soap, mothballs, and the faint electric stink of a breaker that had shorted out. June was standing on the cushions of her sofa, her Maine Coon cat in her arms, water at her ankles. Miss June, I'm taking you to higher ground. Hold on to me. Wade, I knew you'd come. I picked her up. She weighed about 100 pounds, and the cat weighed about 20. Together, we made it to the truck. Her slippers were already gone, lost somewhere under the couch. On the ride back up the easement, I also picked up Kevin Whitaker, her son, who had blown a rear tire on Old Mill Road trying to get to his mother. I threw his gear in the bed and put him in the back seat with his mama. Then I stopped at the Ridgeway place, where a young couple, Tanner and Delaney, were carrying their 18-month-old daughter Juniper in a car seat through water up to Tanner's thighs. By 11 o'clock, my living room had become a rescue shelter. Emma was handing out towels. The fireplace was going. Juniper had stopped crying as soon as Emma sat cross-legged on the rug and bounced her gently. The whole room smelled like cinnamon tea and wet wool. At 11:23, my tablet lit up. Brooke Hennessy had gone live on Facebook. She was standing in her own kitchen, ankles submerged, mascara running down her cheeks, hair half pulled out of the clip. She held the phone shoulder high. Her voice was pitched 2 full notes above normal. Wade Calloway did this. He sabotaged our drainage. He engineered this flood to take revenge on our community. The counter at the bottom of the screen read 1,200 viewers, then 3,000, then 4,800 inside the first 10 minutes. Bryce Holloway stepped into the frame beside her, damp and shaky, nodding along. He did this on purpose. We have a right to sue. I watched 2 minutes of it. Emma watched my face. I set the tablet on the kitchen counter, opened my laptop, and took exactly 4 minutes to post to the Cypress Bluff community page. 4 clips. My footage of the excavation. Brooke clapping. Brooke bragging. Brooke insulting me on the property line. Screenshots of the 5 certified mail receipts, returned unopened. My stamped engineering drawings. And 40 seconds of her scenic view party speech, bragging that Reed had handled the paperwork personally through the Planning Commission. I titled it, "Here's What Actually Happened. Every document is verified." I did not write a comment. I did not defend myself. I closed the laptop and went into the kitchen to make Juniper a grilled cheese. The post spread faster than the live video. Maggie Thornton arrived within 30 minutes of the first share, carrying her phone and a baking sheet of cornbread. She posted her own comment beneath mine. I was at the scenic view party. Every word in that speech is on the recording I gave Wade. I can confirm. At 12:40, Tillman Rourke called from his car. KXAN live truck behind him. ETA to the cul-de-sac. 90 minutes. Did I want him to meet me at the HOA or at my porch? The porch first, then we'll walk down. On my way, Mr. Calloway. At 1:15, Brooke tried Plan B. She texted Sheriff Otis Whitfield's personal cell, a number she'd pulled from some charity golf tournament contact list, and claimed I had intentionally caused the flood. Otis didn't respond. He'd been read into the case by Harlan Buckley 4 days earlier and was already driving toward the valley. At 2:30, the rain stopped. Full stop. The kind of silence that feels louder than the storm that came before it. At 4 in the morning, Reed Hennessy called me. Unknown number. Smooth voice. Friendly tone. Wade. Hey, Wade buddy. Listen, let's talk man to man. Let's fix this before anybody makes things worse. I let his last word finish. Then I spoke once, quietly. Mr. Hennessy, you signed 17 drainage approvals using my private property as public drainage. The Texas Board of Professional Engineers has been investigating you for 14 days. The Attorney General has your file. The only conversation left is with your attorney. Don't call this number again. I hung up and poured another cup of coffee for June, who was sitting on my couch wrapped in Abby's wool blanket with her cat on her lap. Was this always going to happen, Wade? She asked. No, ma'am. It was only going to happen if somebody destroyed the thing that kept it from happening. June nodded slowly. Then it's on her. Sunrise over Wimberley came up the color of polished copper. The rain had cleaned the air so completely I could hear the mockingbird in the oak motte a half-mile off. I drove the F250 down the easement road with Emma beside me, Kevin Whitaker and his mama following in his pickup. We reached the cul-de-sac at 6:27. 11 homes flooded, water still pooled in driveways. Somebody's Weber grill had drifted 100 feet onto a porch. A bass boat trailer had wedged itself against a juniper 3 blocks from its owner. The smell was everything a caliche flood is. Bleach, sludge, gasoline, and the faint sweetness of fabric softener in soaked laundry. Neighbors stood on their porches in bathrobes, holding mugs. Kids had wandered out barefoot. Nobody said much. Tillman Rourke rolled in with the KXAN live truck at 6:31. Drone up. Camera crew on the high side. Priscilla Harmon arrived right after him in her county truck. Then Declan Forsyth from the engineering board. Then 2 patrol cars from the sheriff's office. Otis Whitfield stepping out of the first one. Gray mustache. Cowboy boots. Body camera already running. Brooke Hennessy came out onto her porch in a wool cardigan pulled over a damp blouse. Her hair was pinned up in a clip at an angle that suggested she hadn't slept. The second she saw me, she screamed. There he is! Arrest him! He sabotaged our drainage! Sheriff Whitfield walked up her steps slow and easy. He did not raise his voice. Ma'am, I need to be very clear with you right now. Stop talking. Every word you say is being recorded on my body camera. If you have a complaint, file it in writing. Do not make another accusation on my property or on your own. Brooke tried again. He flooded our neighborhood. Ma'am, stop talking. She stopped. Otis turned to me, calm as a church deacon. Mr. Calloway, did you remove a hydrologic structure on your property? Yes, sir. Under a written enforcement order from the HOA 47 days ago. I complied under written protest. Certified warnings went to all 5 board members. The letters came back unopened. Do you have documentation? I handed him the folder. He opened it and read the cover page. The muscle at the corner of his jaw moved once. Thank you, Mr. Calloway. Declan Forsyth stepped forward next. Gray suit, silver mustache, voice low. Mr. Calloway, I'm investigator with the Texas Board of Professional Engineers. May I see the original permit for the structure you removed? I handed him the second folder. He read for 90 seconds. He looked up. Properly permitted, properly stamped, properly engineered. This was a licensed hydrologic diversion. Thank you, Mr. Calloway. Forsyth turned and walked straight up the steps past Brooke without breaking stride. Ma'am, is your husband home? Brooke's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Priscilla Harmon stepped into the center of the cul-de-sac. She raised her voice just enough for the neighbors on their porches and the KXAN microphone to catch every syllable. I'm the Hays County floodplain manager. Based on the evidence filed with my office 17 days ago, and based on the hydrologic event you experienced last night, I'm issuing a preliminary finding. The Cypress Bluff Estates Certificate of Occupancy may have been issued based on fraudulent drainage calculations. All 87 homes in this subdivision will be subject to review, effective immediately. A woman 3 porches down put her hand over her mouth. A man near the mailbox sat down on the curb. A dog barked somewhere. Brooke finally got her voice back. "This is a witch hunt. Wade did this. Wade." I turned and faced her for the first time in 10 months. I spoke so she wouldn't miss a word. I spoke slow enough for the cameras. "Mrs. Hennessy, 73 days ago, I mailed you a certified letter warning this exact outcome. You refused to sign for it. You refused to read it. You threw a party celebrating the destruction of the only thing between your homes and 14 acre-feet of stormwater. You told your neighbors, on video, that your husband handled the paperwork personally through the Planning Commission. You called my property an eyesore because you couldn't see the engineering underneath it." I paused. The cedar trees dripped softly. "Ma'am, you did not flood because of what I did. You flooded because of what I stopped protecting you from, after you told me to." The cul-de-sac went silent. The mockingbird had stopped. Even Tillman's drone operator held his breath. Brooke opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing. A few minutes later, Reed Hennessy walked out in a rumpled polo. Forsyth met him at the edge of the driveway. "Mr. Hennessy, I need you to come with me for formal questioning. You have the right to an attorney." Brooke watched her husband walk to the state vehicle. Her hands fell to her sides. For the first time in 7 years, she had nothing to say. Tillman eased his mic forward, careful as a man stepping over a snake. "Mr. Calloway, any final statement for the community?" I looked down the cul-de-sac. The sun had cleared the ridge. A heron crossed the valley low and slow. Engineering is just honesty with math. I hope next time this valley remembers that. The news truck footage aired that afternoon on every station from San Antonio to Austin. By sundown, the Attorney General's office had opened a file. By Monday, Reed Hennessy had been formally indicted on 4 counts: conflict of interest, falsification of engineering records, fraudulent plat amendment, and abuse of office. The Texas Board of Professional Engineers stripped Lance Covington's PE license 10 weeks later and fined him $85,000. 3 months after the storm, a Travis County District Court dissolved the Cypress Bluff Estates HOA by judicial order. The declaration was voided for fraud material. All 87 homes reverted to unincorporated status and had to apply individually for new drainage certifications. The HOA's insurance carrier cut checks. $2.1 million spread across the 11 flooded families. June Whitaker received $180,000. Kevin used it to move her into a casita behind his own house in San Marcos. She brought the Maine Coon. She still sends me a card at Christmas. Brooke Hennessy lost her house to foreclosure when Reed's income stopped. She sold for less than she'd paid. Maggie heard she'd moved to a small town in Oklahoma. I don't know if that's true. I hope, wherever she is, she's quieter now. I didn't celebrate. I did the opposite. I rebuilt the berm. This time, with a formal easement, recorded through the county, signed by 9 of my former neighbors. They paid me a nominal $1 a year for the easement rights. In return, I agreed that the diversion structure, my structure, would continue protecting their homes for as long as I owned the property, and for 20 years after, by deed restriction. It cost me $200 in filing fees. It cost them nothing but a signature. That's how real neighbors do it. On what would have been Abby's 62nd birthday, Emma and I drove up to Texas State and announced the Abby Calloway Memorial Scholarship. $25,000 a year. Open to first-generation students studying stormwater engineering or floodplain management. Emma wrote the first check by hand, so the notary wouldn't forget what the paper was for. Emma stood next to me at the announcement, with her mother's photograph in her hand. She spoke one sentence. My mom always said engineering was just caring written down in numbers. Dad proved it. I didn't get through the rest of the ceremony without my eyes giving me trouble. The next spring, I started the Wimberley Watershed Walk, 3 miles, along the natural drainage corridor that used to flood the low side of the valley. Free admission, no sponsors, no branded t-shirts, just families walking and listening to volunteers explain hydrology in plain language. The first year drew 340 people. The second year drew over 900. June Whitaker cut the ribbon. Sheriff Whitfield led the front of the line. 2 years after the storm, Maggie Thornton drove up to my house on a Sunday morning with a pan of cornbread and a pot of chili. We sat on the porch. The Gulf wind was blowing easy. A pair of white-winged doves called from the cedars. "Wade," she said, "we should have listened to you from day one." "Maggie, people learn what they need to learn when they need to learn it. That's not your fault." She looked out over the valley. The new berm ran clean and green between the two slopes. "She used to scare me, you know, Brooke. I was too afraid to speak up. You spoke up when it mattered. That's what counts." We drank our coffee without saying much else. It was enough. Emma visited that weekend. She sat in the kitchen with the old folder open in front of her. My first pencil sketch, Abby's note still on the back. She looked up. "Dad, if Mom were here, what do you think she'd say?" I smiled at the window. The Blanco River was running in the distance, brown and fat with the fall rain. "She'd say I took too long to finish it, and then she'd make me mow the yard."
Wyatt Calloway didn't win that day because he had better engineering, though she did. He won because Brooke Hennessy couldn't stand not being listened to. She had 7 years of yes men, of neighbors stepping aside, of a husband saying whatever she puts across the kitchen counter. And the moment she met a man who just kept his receipts, she kept digging until she buried herself and her subdivision in a collegial flood. There's a lesson here that has nothing to do with firms. It had to do with the fact that petty power only works when nobody is keeping the records. Write the letter, send it certified. Ask for the flat, request the minutes. In every single story like this one, the person who wins is the one who keeps paper while the other side keeps shouting. If you've been through a HOA nightmare, or you're living one right now, drop a comment and tell me about it. I read every single one. If you want to hear about Karen, who tried to bulldoze a veteran driveway and learn some Eastman run deeper than dirt, hit subscribe because we are just getting started.